Thank you for everyone for taking the time to join us today at Cure Cancer's Researcher Lunch and Learn with Dr. Lauren Aoude. I'm Nikki Kinloch. I'm the CEO of Cure Cancer, and I'm delighted to have you here for what will be an informative and hopefully interesting session over the next 45 minutes. I'd like to also note that we have members of our team, our committees and our boards, as well as some of our board observers, as well as many of the fundraisers and donors. So welcome to you all. A little bit of housekeeping. This session will last, as I said, around 45 minutes. But if you do have any questions, and we welcome questions, please type them in the chat box on Facebook as we go along. You'll also notice a link to make a donation. If you're able, please consider making a donation. Any amount, small or large, is important to our cause, and we deeply appreciate your generosity. You can also make Cure Cancer your charity of choice through Change for Change. This enables you to round up or give any of your spare change to Cure Cancer, and you can scan the QR code you can see there in the background to kickstart that for us. And finally, if you'd like to stay updated on our Lunch and Learn sessions, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe to this page. Our goal is to raise awareness about the critical need for cancer research funding, and your support means a lot to us. These small gestures can make a big difference in keeping the conversation going and drive progress towards ultimately a cure. Now, without further ado, please let me introduce you to Dr. Lauren Aoude, who is joining us from Brisbane. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you for having me.
Lauren was a Cure Cancer grant recipient back in 2019 and, of course, now in 2023. Lauren is a UQ Amplify Fellow in the Surgical Oncology Group at the University of Queensland at the newly named Frazer Institute.
It is indeed.
So today we're going to talk about your research on Oesophageal Adenocarcinoma,
Yes,
or we'll refer to it as OAC. And this is a cancer that diagnosis has doubled in Australia in the last 30 years. Terribly sad there. And at the moment, currently, there's only a very few treatments available. So for those of you out there that don't know, OAC Awareness Month is this month in April, and we hope to talk about this type of cancer that you may not know about, and then talk about the wonderful work that Lauren and her team are doing up there in Brisbane as well. So first of all, Lauren, for those that don't know you, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So I feel like you've already given a great introduction. So I'm up in Brisbane at the University of Queensland in the Frazer Institute. My research is very focused on genetics and genomics. So that means that we look at tumour DNA and patient DNA to try to understand how these factors might impact patient treatments and survival outcomes. So we're trying to harness what we understand about DNA and translate that into positive outcomes for patients.
So I think most people would know what DNA means.
Yeah.
Genomics, what is genomics?
So when we talk about genomics, we're usually referring to the DNA in the tumour. And that can often be quite different to our normal DNA, because those cancers evolve and change over time, and they become kind of different to our normal tissue. So we can assess those differences, and we can try to understand, I guess, how the tumour develops, how we can use that to create better treatments or better ways of diagnosing, or even how we can use it for improved surveillance for patients.
Great. Thank you. So have you always been in research? And if so, why did you choose cancer research as your topic of choice?
Well, that is a good question, because I actually have not always been in research. When I went to university, I originally studied engineering, so mechanical engineering, totally different from what I do now. And I also did a Bachelor of Arts. And I'm going to be honest, pretty early on in my engineering career, I knew that that wasn't going to be what I wanted to do forever. And so I was looking around for, I guess, new experiences, new ideas, and I was really lucky to get some work as part of the Australian Cancer Study. Mm-hmm. It was a study running at QIMR Berghofer in Brisbane. And I was so lucky to be able to join the research team. And I was instantly drawn into cancer research. And after a few years of working as a research assistant, I was pretty determined that I was going to do a PhD in research. So I did my PhD in melanoma genetics. And I have been in cancer research ever since, and I haven't looked back.
Oh, great. Thank you for sharing that. So OAC, it is a cancer that I don't think many people would be familiar with, but the growth of diagnosis in OAC, as I said in my introduction, is dramatically increasing here in Australia.
Yes.
Before we go into the work you're doing, could you just share a bit of light on what this type of cancer is, please?
Yeah, so it's a cancer that is located in the food pipe. It can sometimes be at the junction where the stomach is. It has a lot of different risk factors which can be associated with diet, including sort of alcohol and smoking. There is actually also what we call a precursor disease, which is called Barrett's esophagus, and that can increase someone's chances of developing an OAC down the track. Yeah, I hope that's answered it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've spoken before, and we also fund other OAC researchers as well. And we talked about previously how difficult OAC was to one diagnose, because it's one of those cancers that can change. And it's different within the whole esophagus. So could you explain the difficulties around OAC?
Yeah, so OAC is what we would call very heterogeneous. So that means that within the tumour, there are lots of different pockets of different cells, and they don't necessarily look alike. So when there is a treatment out there, sometimes that treatment only targets some of those cell populations. And that becomes really problematic because those other cells can then grow and spread to other places in the body. So because this tumor type can be so heterogeneous, it creates a really big challenge in terms of treatment options.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And in my introduction, I talked about how this diagnosis had doubled, and you talked a bit about smoking and diet. Are they the main factors, or are we better diagnosing this type of cancer now as well?
Yeah, probably all of the above is true. I think there are certainly cancers that are increasing, particularly in Western populations. But also I think as medicine improves, we do get better at diagnosis. Unfortunately for these patients, often though, they do present when the disease is quite advanced, and that can make treatment a little trickier for those patients. So I think anything that research can do to try to make that diagnosis happen earlier in that timeline would really be very beneficial for treatment for patients down the track.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And why did you decide to focus on this type of cancer?
I mean, one, it's so important because I think this cancer is understudied. I think here in Australia, there's only a handful of research groups that really focus on this cancer type. It is considered a rare cancer, but because its incidence is increasing, I mean, those rates are going up and up. So I think it's important. We need to do something about it.
Yeah, of course. And what are the risks associated with OAC? Is it a type of cancer you can treat and then survive, or is it something that sadly becomes fatal?
Yeah, sadly, it can be quite fatal. So there are a lot of factors involved there. I think often people don't realize that something's going on until the cancer's quite advanced. At the moment, the current treatments that people get are chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and surgery in various combinations. And they can have quite a toll on patients. The surgery can be quite a big surgery. So that really affects quality of life and the outcomes at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah.
And we've talked about before different types of cancers being, or people having a predisposition to certain types of cancer.
Yes.
With OAC, do you see the same? Is it a certain ethnicity it's higher in? Is it higher in men versus women? What are you seeing in your work so far?
So this whole idea of inherited risk is actually what my Cure Cancer project is really trying to understand. So for some cancers, there's been a lot of research, and a lot of you might have heard of BRCA1 and BRCA2, which are breast cancer risk genes, and they've been quite well characterized. But for esophageal adenocarcinoma, very little work has really been done in that space. So we don't know for the most part what sort of inherited risk some people might have. And so that's really why I've chosen this sort of area of research, because I think it's really important to try to understand what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would lead me to the question, why has so little been done? Obviously, we know in other types of cancers like breast cancer, there's been so much progress over the years.
Yeah.
Why has that not been the case with OAC?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I don't think it's had perhaps as much sort of media coverage as perhaps some other diseases might have, and maybe that's why. To be honest, I don't know. But it's time to do something about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So can you just talk about your setup at your research? Do you have a team, and what does that look like?
Yeah, we have actually a really diverse team, and I think that's what makes our research so translatable. So my lab head is Professor Andrew Barber, and he's a surgical oncologist at a couple of the hospitals here in Brisbane. So with his influence, we keep our research really focused on patient outcomes and patient needs. Within our team, we also have bioinformaticians. So that's a big word. Sandra Brosda in our team, so her role as a bioinformatician is to analyze that really complex genomic data that we get when we look at these tumors. So she, writes computer code and does all that very, very complicated work in the background. We also have people in our group that do other lab work. So I'm quite lab-based. So I run experiments in the lab, and so do other researchers. And in our team, we also have a few students. So I have an honours student that's helping me on this project. But we also have a couple of PhD students as well. And that probably rounds out our team.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. I'm just going to take a break there and welcome our new guest. We're lucky enough to be talking to Dr. Lauren Aoude today up in Brisbane on her work on esophageal cancer. So what does your day look like? If there's a typical day, what's it like?
My days can be really, really, really different. So if I'm starting a new experiment, I can be in the lab all day. If I'm in the analysis phase, I'll probably be sitting in my office at my computer. Our group actually runs a biobank. So what that means is that we collect tumor samples and blood samples from cancer patients for the purposes of research. So we ask patients whether they'd like to participate in our program. And if they are willing, any tissue that's not used for diagnosis becomes a research sample. So we process those samples in our lab. So for example, today, I've done some analysis. I've been over to the hospital to pick up samples. I've been in the lab processing samples for experiments down the track. My days can be really different.
It's very. We have a question, and thank you. Just a reminder, if you do want to ask Lauren a question, just pop it in the question box or the comment section there on Facebook, and I'll weave it into our conversation. So just stepping back a notch, the question here around the symptoms of, and you mentioned that OAC often people present very late in the case there, but are there any obvious symptoms as a patient that you could look for prior to
so when the tumor is in the esophagus, it actually starts to create a bit of a blockage. So I think some of the symptoms patients present with is they can have trouble swallowing, they can have a lot of weight loss and pain in the area. They would probably be sort of perhaps the more obvious symptoms. Patients that have had a lot of reflux and that might be, I guess, have seen a clinician previously are sometimes on a program where they're getting screened quite often. So those patients sometimes get endoscopies, which is like a camera that goes down and has a look at the esophagus as well to track those changes.
Interesting, thank you. And another question that's just come in around, you were, for those that have just joined us and are new here, that OAC is heterogeneous, so it's constantly changing. And the question around that is that just in OAC, or do other cancers have that same heterogeneity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So certainly other cancers have that heterogeneity. So there's, I think, like everything in life, there is a really wide spectrum. Some cancers can look quite similar from person to person, and others can be really varied within the same cancer type. So esophageal cancer is a bit similar to melanoma, where I also have a bit of experience. And because they have a lot of what we would call environmental damage. So in your esophagus, it's the food you eat, the drink, all those things that can influence that environment around the tumor. And that can cause it to have a lot of changes and a lot of heterogeneity.
Very interesting, thank you.
Yeah.
So you touched on how OAC is a rare cancer.
Yeah.
How is it classified by being a rare cancer? Is that purely the numbers, or
yes,
is it because it's less common globally? How do you classify it, and how does it become an unrare cancer?
It's purely on the numbers, but I don't have the numbers to give you. Yeah, but it is certainly increasing in some populations compared to others. So certainly more in Western populations, it's becoming kind of more prevalent.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, thank you. And then a question around accessibility for screening. And we know we have for 3 types of cancer here in Australia, there are national screening programs. Does anything like that exist for OAC? Or if you think you might start to be developing something along these lines, what do you do to get
So there is no screening program, no national screening program, unless you have been diagnosed with Barrett's esophagus, which is that precursor kind of lesion, and then you will probably be on a bit of a surveillance program. But otherwise, there is no national screening program that I'm aware of. And, you know, if you do feel like you have symptoms, I think your first port of call would be to speak to your GP and to take it from there.
Yeah, lovely. Okay,
yeah.
thank you. So we've talked about how it's rare, how it's the diagnosis is and incidence are increasing. You touched on at the beginning, you're looking at the DNA. So let's delve deeper into that. We might get scientific here, folks, but let's delve deeper into that. What particularly are you and your team looking for?
Yeah, so I am particularly looking at genes that we inherit. So just like there is BRCA1 and 2 in breast cancer, I'm trying to understand if something similar exists for patients that have esophageal adenocarcinoma. So we are looking at genes that we know have been involved in the development of cancer, of any other types of cancers as well. And we're also interested in a group of genes that are involved in DNA damage repair. So they're a group of genes, and it is their job to repair any damage that happens to those cells. So if their function isn't happening like it should, there is the potential for cancers to develop. So we're trying to understand if these sorts of pathways are involved in these cancer types.
So are you saying or supposing that there might be a gene from one type of cancer is also causing the OAC as well?
Could be. Yeah, it could be. There are often when you have a gene that has a cancer risk, often it can have a risk of different types of cancers, not just one type of cancer. I keep going back to the examples of BRCA1 and BRCA2. It can also give you a higher risk of ovarian cancer, for example. So there is the potential that other cancer genes could also be playing a part in this cancer type as well. It's that research hasn't really been done yet. So we really need to better understand what's happening there.
Okay, thank you. And when you say you're looking at these genes, what in more detail are you doing to understand their impact?
Yeah, so we use a technique that we call sequencing, so DNA sequencing. And that lets us look at all the bases that make up a person's DNA, essentially. And so that is, I wish I knew the number off the top of my head. That is so many base pairs. And our bioinformatics team will help us assess all of that data to look for a tiny one base pair, one letter spelling mistake that might happen in someone's DNA that changes their risk factor. So it might change the way that gene functions. It might mean that a gene that's involved in DNA damage repair can no longer function properly. And so that person's risk might increase. So we're just trying to understand what's happening at that DNA level and whether there are some people that might have a higher risk than others.
So it really is microscopic differences.
Yeah, it's really small differences that we're trying to understand.
Wow. And that
they really do change gene function and therefore, have these big effects downstream.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what your team are working on at the moment.
Yeah.
What are you hoping to achieve from this year's funding for your research?
Ooh, yeah. So So let's be really specific. So this project, I'm trying to look at the DNA of, as many samples as I can get. So I'm trying to access a lot of data that's out there from publicly available databases. I'm looking at the samples that we have here in our lab. So I'm trying to get together as big a cohort as I can to try to really understand what's happening here and to try to, get to the bottom of whether these genes exist in OAC in terms of risk and to understand whether we can target them with different drugs. Because sometimes these types of gene mutations have treatments that are available for them that might be used in a different way. So, I think if we understand the big picture, then we can really try to understand whether there are different treatments that might work for these patients.
That's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, we've seen the same in our discussions around brain cancer, neuroblastoma, the same as pancreatic cancer, that in fact the drugs that are being used now to treat these that are not chemotherapy are actually drugs already approved to treat other diseases as well.
Because often different cancers can have the same mechanism. Perhaps a drug that's used for one cancer type might apply to another, but you have to understand what's happening at a genomic level before you can make that call.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So just welcoming, I've seen a few more people pop on. Thank you. We're talking to Dr. Lauren Aoude up in Brisbane about esophageal cancer today. We have about 10 to 15 minutes left of this chat. So if you do have any further questions, please don't be afraid to pop them in that comment section, and I will put them to Lauren as we chat. So you're doing a lot of work on a micro level. What's the time frame? It's probably like asking how long's a piece of string, but you know, how close are you to discovering a link here? Are you right at the beginning, or you just don't know how close you are?
I think we don't know. I mean, I think how long is a piece of string is a good analogy, because I feel like with projects like this, I think there's always more that you can learn. So it's just all of it, it's like the next step on the path. I don't know. I hope soon.
Yeah, absolutely. A question about, you're talking about biobank, and obviously you looking to increase your samples. Where do you get your samples from? Are they Australian samples, or do you have overseas samples as well?
No, they're Australian samples collected from hospitals in Brisbane. So we have been running our biobank for many years now, and we're very lucky to work with a large team of clinicians, and so they help us in the process, and they collect samples at surgery if patients have consented, of course. And so most of our samples are from around Brisbane. But because we have that good clinical link, we do have some samples that have come to us through clinical trials, for example, which are national. So we do really try to connect into that national network and kind of bring everyone together.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always talk about, in the research world, researchers work together. There's a lot of collaboration, and you know, we're so excited that our alumni continue to work together as well. Have you seen any exciting progress or trends in OAC cancer research, whether it's at your lab or across Australia or internationally recently?
So I know that there is some really, I keep bringing it back to genomics, but I know there is some great genomics work happening with Marjan Nayeni, who's at the Garvan Institute, and we collaborate quite closely. So she also works on esophageal cancer. And Sandra Brosda, who is also in my lab, we've all collaborated on this sort of disease type. And we work closely, and they're doing some amazing tumor genomics work. And so, for example, Sandra is trying to understand how tumors change over time, and how treatments can affect how the tumor looks, essentially, to try to pinpoint what those things are that might make some tumors treatable and others not. And Marjan's doing all this amazing work looking at what we call long read sequencing. So that's trying to understand structural changes that happen in DNA in these tumors. So a lot of work in this space. Yeah, and I'm delighted to say that we've funded both of those researchers as well,
which is exciting. And you know, the piece you touched on about how important bioinformatics is, and it's incredible. For those of you on the call that don't know, essentially these researchers never go to the lab. They sit in front of a very powerful computer and analyze data, which is the way of research nowadays. In some cases.
It is.
Very exciting. So we've talked about what you're trying to do. What are you hoping are the long-term impacts of your research?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I hope long term we identify genomic targets so that we can pair up other drugs and new treatments, so that we can move, I guess, towards what we would call precision medicine or personalized medicine. So that's not everyone getting the same type of treatment, but looking at your tumor DNA and then trying to pick from a whole host of different treatments. So that to me would be a really great result from this research, if we could really understand what was happening to that level and we could be more precise.
I mean, that would be incredible, wouldn't it? And not just that you'll be able to personalize treatment, that they may not need to have chemotherapy.
That's right.
We know how it's so severe on the
human
body.
It is, yeah. Actually, for esophageal cancer, very recently, they've been trialing immunotherapies, which is very exciting because it's had such an amazing impact in other cancer types. So it'll be interesting to see what the results of all these trials are as they come out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, be an option very soon, I think.
Fingers crossed. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Moving away from your research for a bit, and just to talk about the funding. Obviously, you're a 2023 recipient of the Cure Cancer grant. What does that funding mean to you personally?
Oh, it means so much. I literally could not do this project without the Cure Cancer funding. So thank you. I am truly grateful. Funding for early and mid-career researchers like myself, I think without this type of funding, a lot of really, I think, interesting and innovative research just wouldn't happen. And I don't think we would make the advances in cancer research that we do. So it's so wonderful that Cure Cancer funds early career researchers, because they are going to be the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a lot of our donors and supporters online now. What message would you tell them about their money? You know, I'm sure you're going to say it's well spent, but you know, what do their donations mean to you and your fellow researchers?
Yeah, I mean, from all of us, a big thank you, because I mean, we couldn't do what we do without you, and we really truly appreciate the support, and the research just honestly wouldn't happen without, you know, the support of people out there.
Yeah, thank you. This is the second time you've been one of our recipients. Interesting question, but what have you learned since the first time and your second time of funding?
What have I learned? It's a tricky one. I sometimes say running a project is like running a small business. The things you learn, I guess, in a practical sense, are that you have to learn how to deal with all sorts of aspects of, you know, finance and contracts and project managing and all of these things. Personally, I think I'm evolving and developing as a researcher. I think, I think my body of research is increasing, and I'm hoping that's going to translate into a really big impact for patients.
Yep.
Yeah,
lovely. And
that's what I've learned.
How obviously you're up there at the Frazer Institute, but how do you think institutions generally, not where you are, but generally, how can they be more supportive of early career research?
I would love to see institutes provide perhaps more support for salaries for researchers. So at the moment, it's a really tough field. It's really, the funding out there is quite limited. And I think as a result, unfortunately, we're losing a lot of really bright academics to other areas. Yeah. So I think if institutes and universities could really support the staff at that salary level, I think that would be amazing. And I think it would go really far for research in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the other challenges besides funding? And obviously that is a significant challenge that you and many on this call may not understand that, but sometimes researchers don't even know whether they'll receive funding for the next year of their project.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's actually a really common situation. You know, people have really great research and they just have so much uncertainty about whether it will carry on.
Yeah.
They don't know where they will be next year.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation. And, you know, the work that you and your fellow researchers are doing is incredible. And, you know, for us, our goal is to be able to give you and your researchers some certainty in, you know, in your work, but also in your salary, because you have to exist as well.
Oh, absolutely. And it's
so
really tough. Yeah, it's really tough when you don't know where your salary is going to come from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What other challenges beyond that significant hurdle do you find yourself facing in the research?
What other challenges? I guess the thing is a research career is really broad and varied. So a lot of things come up in in the workplace in terms, I think I've touched on it. Sorry.
That's right.
Like obviously managing a team when you've perhaps had not very much experience in the past, like all these things come up. So research, you know, it involves working in a team, working well individually, and then all those other bits of sort of business management that you've perhaps not even thought about that, you know, come up for projects.
Well, you have to manage your staff, your team, your budget.
That's right. That's right. And you're not necessarily, you know, aware of that when you do a science degree or a PhD. So they're all things that you learn on the job.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
But also quite rewarding.
Yeah, of course. And we'll talk about that in a minute. We just got probably about another 5 minutes. So if anyone on the line would like to drop in another question, I'll weave that in as we wrap up. So Cure Cancer have just opened our grant round funding for 2024 for those researchers that may be on the line. As a grant recipient yourself, do you have any advice for any new early career researchers?
So my advice would be to just go for it and to, I guess, follow the research that you're passionate about, because I think that's how we do our best work. And I think, you know, try to build a network of people around you, because I think that's what improves your research. And for example, I feel like Cure Cancer has such an amazing community of researchers, and it's really supportive. So I think, you know, as an early career researcher, you've got to find your community and just really go for it and follow your ideas and let it take you there.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the positives then.
Okay.
And I'm just going to weave in a question. Someone has asked, well, why do you do this when you don't even know where your salary is coming from? What keeps you going?
That is a good question. And people do ask this a lot. But I think at the end of the day, I feel like most researchers would say that what we really want is to make a difference. And I think I personally find my job very rewarding. Like I want patients to have better care. I want better health outcomes. And I'm so passionate about it, but I think, you know, the other stressful aspects of the job, I think we just take it as part and parcel because we just really want to be doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And what keeps you motivated? Obviously you want to make an impact, but you know, you have a team there as well. You need to motivate as well. So what drives you, considering particularly some of this work? It could be a year before you see a change or an impact. How do you keep going?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to phrase this well, but someone once said to me that as a researcher, there is a time when you learn something for the very first time. So no one else in the world has ever made this discovery or this finding before. And to me, it's always that little spark that, you know, the what we don't know where our research is going, but I think we're all excited to find out, Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the final question before we wrap up, very large question here, but what are your hopes for the future of cancer research?
Oh, I mean, my hopes for cancer research are that it is, I think, well funded and well resourced, so that we can get all these improvements into the clinic quickly, that we can make a difference and improve patients' lives. I think, I hope we get there and we get there quickly.
Lovely. Well, I don't think any of us could argue with that. To improve patients' lives, to look at having individual treatment pathways, to be able to genetically look at whether someone's predisposed to getting this type of cancer, and ultimately having better treatments that may already exist for patients with OAC as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. It has been incredibly informative.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone online. I hope you found that very interesting. We will be sharing this talk. It's immediately available online, but we'll be sharing it in our EDM to you all next week. If you do have any other questions for Dr. Aoude, please let us know and we'll be able to pass them on.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. And we look forward to seeing the rest of you. Our next session is with Dr. Senegal on the 18th of May. That's a Thursday at 12:30. So for now, goodbye, have a good afternoon, and we'll see you on the 18th of May.